Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share insights on what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumey, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the co-founder of Scissors Scotch, Erik Anderson. Erik, welcome to the show.
Frank, pleasure to be here. Excited, ready to go and chat today.
All right, let's do it. So, Erik, you shared with me before the show that you are co-founder, and two of your buddies also are part of this clan that you guys all co-founded together. So share with me how this whole thing started. As like kind of three best friends say, hey, we need to open a place. We're going to cut hair and drink scotch.
You know what? You kind of nailed it, right? Pretty much the genesis of it. You know, it was, I had got moved to Omaha, Nebraska for, I always say, my first big kid job out of college, right? I had a sales territory, and one of the first things I did was Google men's haircut Omaha. And, I found, there's the good value chains out there, that, they do a good job for what you get. You have your local barbershops and then your women's salons. And, I was ready to pay a little bit more for a nicer haircut. I wanted to look good, wanted to, make an appointment, et cetera. And, couldn't find an experience that, resonated with me as as a guy who wanted that elevated experience. And started researching the industry, saw some really cool concepts out there that, you got a beer with your service, or it was for guys, right? There's a lot of, male focused type things, right? But I didn't see anything that really elevated the experience to the level I thought we could do. And thought we had an opportunity, to provide that for men across the country. And so after some liquid courage one night, I told my two best friends I wanted to open up a barbershop and call it Scissors Scotch, right? And, they're sitting there laughing, and I'm known to have some wild ideas from time to time. And They're like, nah, you can't. What are you talking about? We're not opening up a barbershop. And so a week later, we were on a Google Hangouts call and sent them all the research I had done. And at that point, we decided to start building the business together. So, maybe the original genesis might have been my idea, but by no means is Scissors Scotch what it is today without, my two co-founders and some of the key pieces we had very early on. So been fortunate to have that support team and my two best friends and co-founders to help lead this company together.
That's sweet. I haven't met too many people where they got together with their best friends, like as a 3-pack and said, we're going to start this, where all three of your lives were in the right place to do this. What were the three of you doing before this?
It's pretty funny because one of my co-founders, Sean Finley, him and I grew up together in Kansas City, best friends since we were 5, 6, 7, swim team, baseball, basketball, all that. And he was still in law school at the time when we started Scissors Scotch. And so he was a JD MBA, one of the smartest guys I know, finishing his 3rd year in law school when we filled out our LLC paperwork and said, we're going to go do this. So he was in a very different part of his life. Tanner was working at a company called Cerner, so healthcare. So he was in healthcare sales and implementation. And then I was doing large commercial insurance sales at the time. And so, two of us were in the real world. Sean always likes to say he was going through his Van Wilder stage, right, in college for 7 years. And yeah, so at that point it was, let's go do this, right? We discussed the concept together in February of 2014, and we were open, 13 months later with our first location.
Where was the first location open?
Omaha, Nebraska. So it was living in Omaha at the time for the sales territory, and that's sort of where we targeted and said, hey, I know there's no real competition up here. Let's see what we can do in Omaha. And we did it. It's, Tanner, so there's myself, Tanner, and Sean. Tanner moved into my basement with my now wife and I. And so, that kind of like a true startup thing, right? Tanner's living in my basement. We're building a business together. We don't really know what we're doing. We're figuring out as we go. And, we always joke it's fortunate we were in Omaha and fortunate with the landlord that we had at the time, because man, we didn't know what we were doing when we signed our first lease, and he treated us so fairly. And it's just, you always think about those. Not really. There's a luck factor, right? When you stumble into something, and we were just treated so well from the start. So
sure. Did your families think you guys were nuts?
Totally. There was definitely some of that, right? I remember just in conversation with my girlfriend at the time, and we're driving down. She always talks about it. She's like, I know the exact street we were on, where we were going. We were going to Target, and you're talking about what if we open up a barber shop and call it Scissors and Scotch? And she's like, the F we're doing that. Like we had just bought a house together, we're doing good.
Right.
Like, no, you're crazy. But I will say, Tanner comes from a very entrepreneurial family. His family owned a bunch of businesses growing up. I knew he always wanted to, do his own thing, and, very sharp, intelligent business mind. And same with Sean, right? And,
Right.
the push for me really is, I was talking to my dad, and my dad was finishing, he got his PhD, but he had me when he was still in school. And I went to him with this idea, 25 years old. And he says, you know what, Erik, when I was 30 and just had you, I had $150,000 in debt, and I had to work my way out. He was like, if this doesn't work, you're 25, you're still going to be in a better position than I was in. So go take a chance. Right. And so to have somebody that believes in you like that and pushes you, that was a really cool experience for me, to have that support system.
Erik, that is such great advice. I think, thinking back to when I was 25, or my daughter's 25 now, my son's 22, and when we're living in it, when we're that age and we're living day to day, we still have that fear sometimes that steps in and prevents us from wanting to go for our goals. But looking back, I'm 55 now, and I look back and I'm like, wow, I could have taken even more risk. And,
Right.
that was actually a piece of advice that I had gotten from this mentor of mine, that he said, if he could have done anything differently when he was younger, it's just keep taking more risk the younger you are, because let's face it, what was the worst thing that could have happened if it failed? You weren't going to die.
Right. Yeah. And look, I enjoy telling this story, and you can tell it, like, we got told no by 3 different banks. Right. So what's great is Sean and Tanner are both Excel wizards. Right. So we had a very detailed out financial model, pro forma business plan. We had it all. Right. We were putting up over 120,000 of our own money that we pulled together. And we were asking for $150,000 SBA loan.
Okay.
So keep in mind, at that time, I think it was like, we were still like 90% guarantee or something like that. So nothing. And so
Sure.
for us to get told no by 3 different banks, it's like, well, what the hell is going on here? So we ended up working with a business bank broker type thing. And I'll never forget this. So Sean, Tanner, and I were in Las Vegas for one of our best friends' bachelor parties. We're in the sports book very early at like 8 a.m. right in Vegas. We probably stayed up all night. But Tanner gets a phone call from this guy, and he says, hey, I got your loan. And we were just like, how cool is that, right? So we're all together at the time. He's sitting there, 3 days later when we get back from Vegas, we're in the bank signing the paperwork, and we're off and running. And so that's another cool story that happened. It just so happened that we were all together at the time in Vegas. So that was pretty cool.
Did you guys map out at that early on which role each one of you were going to play?
Not at that time, right? Well, I'll say this. We knew sort of what we were going to be doing with our first shop, right? Because Sean was not living in Kansas City or in Omaha at the time. So it was Tanner and I, boots on the ground, right? Mm-hmm. Where Tanner was running, he was very big in technology, POS, handling, some of the staffing side of that stuff, et cetera. And I was very client focused, facing and experience based. And so I worked the bar every single day for our lounge reception bar area for the first 6 months. And I met every client that came through the door. Right. And what that helped with us is I was able to have a unique lens into, okay, how do clients perceive us? What can we get better at? Right. I would send an email to every single first time client personally asking for feedback. Right. And so that was one of those things where we were very big on doing things that don't scale early on, because you can generate a lot of great feedback, communication loops, et cetera. And so, as the company evolved and grew, we had to have conversations about, okay, who's doing what, who's doing it when, who's taking control of, operations, sales, et cetera, because we opened the first 4 locations ourselves. And so those 4 corporate locations really helped us refine our footprint, our offerings, our first location, we did massages and manicures and pedicures. We stopped doing that at about 9 months after our first location, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were trying to be everything for everyone. And we realized our core focus was give great haircuts, give great cocktails, and have a damn good, culture inside of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to refine that process. And when it came to 2017 and saying, hey, how are we going to grow this company together? It was, hey, are we going to take on an equity partner? What are we going to do, right? Are we going to open corporate stores? Are we going to franchise? And at that point, we decided to start franchising. And so we had to take a step back and say, okay, we've opened, ran, and operated locations for the first 2.5, 3 years of our existence.
Mm-hmm.
That is completely different than building a franchisor and a franchisor to be successful. And so that's when, we sold one of our corporate stores at the time to our banker. Right. He knew the numbers, and that helped us fund the franchisor, right? Because we were funneling profits in from our corporate locations to open the second, third, fourth, et cetera. But we needed to build a franchising company. And to do that, we had to have an operations plan, a marketing plan, a training program, a support system, right? We had to lay the infrastructure and foundation. So, when we open 10 locations in a year, or next year, hopefully when we're opening 20 plus, we have the infrastructure and the systems in place to go do that appropriately.
Wow. I was thinking about, to kind of get in your mind here, you have 4 company-owned locations, and you're sort of at this crossroads, right? On where do you go from here? Because once you start getting, north of a half dozen company-owned locations, you really have decided already who you are.
Correct. Yeah, you're exactly right. And you've chosen that path, right? In terms of, when you're at 6 company-owned locations, 7, 8, that's a real organization.
Absolutely.
Our stores are $1 million plus AUV, right? So you're talking about a $6 million operation at 6 stores. That needs, district manager, regional manager, management training programs. That needs people leading it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point in time, it was, hey, because again, our bank was like, yeah, you guys are doing good. We'll lend you $1 million. That's 2 stores a year, right? Like barbershops don't have a ton of collateral. You know what I mean? And
Right.
So that really wasn't the growth plan we wanted to take. And so entered the franchising model. And, frankly, it was one we were hesitant to before we really understood it and immersed ourselves in what the opportunities franchising brought. We were very big on our culture and control. And control is a bad way to phrase it. It's not like we were control freaks, but we were so oriented on the client experience and the team experience,
right,
that we thought we would lose something if we went to the franchising model. But actually it's reverse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you can go out and find the right franchisees that believe in your core values, believe in the brand, they're going to be a better execution an operator in Atlanta, per se, than we would be with just a regular manager. And that's no knock at like remote management or corporate store development or whatever. It's just a reality and a fact that when somebody's investing in you and your brand, they're going to be the one driving that vision and setting the goals for the team at a different level than you are.
Yeah. And Erik, that's a real factor that potential franchisors think about right before you start franchising your concept. It is a reality that you are going to be turning over your business to a franchise owner that you hope, believes in your vision and is going to adhere to the system standards. Not every franchisee is going to do that. In fact, some people are not really cut out to be franchise owners because they want to, drive the ship. They want to be able to control their destiny completely. But being part of a franchise system means it's really working together with the franchisor, that you guys are all rowing in the same direction. But I do agree with you that when you do have those franchisees that believe in the vision, it is certainly much easier to lead the organization than having a lot of company and locations, right?
Yep. Agreed. Agreed 100%. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. So bring the audience up to speed. You have 32 locations total, 12 of which are company owned. You're in 9 states plus DC. So right now, what are you guys thinking in terms of growth? Are you thinking of adding company and location still, or going just franchising? Where do we go from here?
It's going to be a heavily weighted hybrid model towards franchising. And when I say heavily weighted, yes, we'll continue to add corporate stores in certain markets that we already have a footprint in like the Denver market, right? We have 5 of our locations out there are company owned, and we have a great management team out there already, right? We have great people in the field. Our staff is incredible. Our team is great. We've done a good job of building brand awareness. So we'll continue to add a few stores out there at a time. But our focus mainly is on growing this through franchising and finding the right franchise partners for our brand. I mentioned there are some one-off things. We are a unique brand with liquor licensing in the bar component where, there's certain states and localities where instead of putting that onus on a franchisee, I'll use Minneapolis as an example. They have some really quirky and unique liquor laws where I don't want to give that to a franchisee to do, right? We can maybe do a few stores in Minneapolis. We'll go take those corporately, right? Where we can make sure that we're testing the product, not putting a franchisee in a bad position from a legal standpoint, et cetera. So, we really, those are one-offs though, right? So it's going to be something where our core focus is building the franchise brand.
Okay. How did you find your first, dozen franchisees? Were they customers? Were they through broker groups? Where'd you find these people?
Yeah. And this is where, again, as being an emerging franchisor, franchising is expensive, right? And so you have to ask yourself, how are you going to generate leads? Are you going to compete in that front? And our first few franchisees were all organic of connections, right? Whether they were a customer or they were a connection from another networking group or something like that. So our first ever franchisee, like I said, was our banker. He purchased the Omaha location that we started. And so he was our first quote unquote franchisee. Now, our first ever ground up franchisee was a connection through Sean, who he went to law school with. So he went to law school with somebody who got into franchising another concept with his business partner, and they built that up to 6-7 locations. He heard about what Sean was doing, and that was our first discovery day, quote unquote, whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
Was in a WeWork in Kansas City, right? Just like making sure we had a place to bring people in and have meetings at. But so that was a mutual connection. Our third franchisee was a customer that purchased locations in Dallas. And again, we've made mistakes, right? With, bringing people in that are now not in the system anymore. And we've learned from that, right? Sure. But your first few franchisees, people that are going to come to you are going to be your brand advocates and your early adopters. And that's not a bad thing. That can be a real strength to a brand that's trying to emerge in the franchising space. But you got to be really detailed and focused, because naturally as a founder and a developer and somebody who wants to sell and you want to grow your brand, God, it's so easy to get excited about getting that first franchise fee check, seeing a franchisee go through the real estate process. But you have to ask yourself, is this person going to be the right fit? Are they going to follow what we're doing, right? Are they going to make sure that uphold the standards of the brand? Do they understand how much work this takes? And it's not just going to be, hey, this is a really sexy brand. I want to buy a franchise. It'll be like Chick-fil-A and we'll have 100 people standing outside to get their haircut. No, man. I mean, this is a service-based business. It's people-driven. Every business is people-driven, right? But it's been, you take a lot of learnings from those early stages of development and how you grow your brand moving into the future. And so we just joined a broker network here in the last few months for FranChoice, and so we'll be utilizing them for leads here moving forward. And that was sort of where Sean Tanner and I wanted to make sure that once we got those couple organic sales in, that helped set up. We were fine from a cash perspective, right? We didn't have to worry about, hey, we're going to run out of money for payroll or keep the lights on. So like when you can make sure you're keeping the lights on, and then now you need to invest in your infrastructure to develop and sell and scale, that's really what we wanted to do. And so I think we've threaded the needle well through that time period.
Erik, you sound like an industry veteran, not somebody who's only franchised since 2017. I'm impressed.
I appreciate that. And we do our best, and I'll give credit to Sean and Tanner for pushing me, right? A lot of times, co-founders or founders, they're lonely, right? Maybe their co-founder's not in the business anymore. And to be able to have two of my best friends that still are, that are in the business every single day, we're driving to make this better. We didn't just start franchising on a whim. We researched it, we immersed ourselves in it, and continue to do that. And, we like to think we bring some fresh ideas to the table about how we do things from a process standpoint internally with our team, with our set of franchisees, with the corporate team, et cetera. But I appreciate that. And it's all credit to the people around us for sure.
That's great. Yeah, you certainly have solved the issue of the loneliness, because that happens when you grow in a business where you feel like the larger the company grows, I feel like the circle gets smaller and smaller of, the people that you can talk to about what's going on strategically and what's in your head and where you want to go, because it's going to affect a whole lot of people. I know I've shared that before in
Absolutely.
past episodes, and it's something that it's a very real thing. But the three of you together, that is the pro of the three of you being together. The downside, of course, is what happens when you guys don't all agree. How do you work it out?
Okay, so this is where you want an odd number, right?
Sure.
You got two or four, you're kind of, it could be in a pickle here, right? And what I'll say about that is what we've done a lot of internal looking at processes and organizational structure and making sure that we're communicating clearly with our team currently, right? That's evolved over time. We have 12 employees on the HQ team, including us three. We have to have clear responsibilities of who's responsible for what, who's responsible when, et cetera. From a decision-making standpoint, and something that we got lucky on is when you have three founders, a lot of times those people, men, women, whoever, two founders, four founders, whatever, they're going to have similar strengths, right, and weaknesses. And so again, it is a pure luck thing where like our strengths complement each other's weaknesses. And so we're able to work together dynamically on different projects and come to resolutions that work for everybody. And when we are at a critical juncture of saying, hey, we're making a big decision for the company initiative in 24 or whatever. We're going to have passionate discussions about what we think is right for Scissors and Scotch. And ultimately, the way it usually works with us three is there are really no more than two viewpoints, right? And so you might have two people having a discussion, and usually they're not far off, right? Like sometimes it is diametrically opposed. But what's great about the third is that there's somebody that's always sort of in the middle, right? And what happens is that person is able to help discuss and mediate and have thoughtful insights from both people to help come to a decision that's going to move the company forward. And where we always land is, hey, it's a united front.
Right.
No matter the decision that's made, if I'm in a discussion with Sean and Sean angle or path forward ultimately is the way we go, I'm fully on board, right? Because if you're not and you're jaded by that or you're hurt by it, that's just bad for everybody. And that's where having that dynamic of three people and three people who respect the hell out of each other, able to move that forward, that's huge, right? The respect factor is one that I think you can't overlook, right? Because while we started the company as best friends, that respect and friendship has only grown and gotten stronger. Early on, that was a very tough thing. To your point earlier about you don't usually the three best friends just jumping in and doing it, right? Yeah, there were some road bumps, but man, we got stronger because of it. And hopefully the future is just, the sky's the limit for where we think we can take this brand.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you guys are feeling your way around, right, when you're starting out. So
yep.
that's normal.
That's a great win.
Yeah. I want to go back to, we were talking about the, franchisees and who's right and not right for the brand. Who is your ideal franchise owner?
Yeah, man. Their traits are going to be strong interpersonal and people skills, right?
Okay.
This is an industry that is high touch, highly focused on customer experience, and highly focused on the team experience, right? Where stylists and barbers and the people in this industry, they're phenomenal. I always like to equate them to they're artists and they're creative, right? These people didn't just one day pick up and say, hey, I want to cut hair. I'm going to go cut hair and I get to take a month-long course and I'm good. They're investing tens of thousands of dollars to go get their cosmetology license or their barber license or both or aesthetics or whatever, right? And so they're highly skilled individuals with a craftsmanship and a trade. And you have to foster a culture that is going to get them excited to come to work, right? And that's one thing where when we started this, from a stylist industry, the average time a cosmetologist spends in the industry is less than 3 years.
Really?
And a lot of the reasons for that is because of lack of benefits, lack of paid time off, lack of health insurance, and just an overall just burnout, right? Burnout on culture. It's not good. And so we were very heavily focused on our core values, how we build employee engagement, how we build culture. And you might ask, well, how does that fit your ideal franchisee candidate? Well, they need to believe in that too, right? They need to want to lead people and want to build teams, because what happens is if you get somebody in that, they want to cut payroll or they're all hyper focused on expenses, that's not the franchisee for us. The franchisee for us is somebody who says, hey, I'm going to treat my team excellent. I'm going to build an awesome culture, and they're going to go take care of my clients. Because when we're doing 30,000 appointments a year, you need a lot of stylists to do that, right? And you can't do it if you're constantly turning people over, if your, employee retention's bad. You can't do that. And so if you have a happy team, and a team that's bought into what you're doing at the local level and the culture, they are going to be able to go out and deliver a high level experience on that side of it. And so that's really who we're looking for when we're talking about ideal franchise candidates for Scissors and Scotch.
Are franchisees typically owner operated, or are they hiring a manager and they hands off? Which I know you want them to have the great interpersonal skills, but is there an option for them?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so most of our franchisees are hiring a manager, right? But there are some franchisees that are franchising in Nashville. He was a first-time franchisee, former business owner of a staffing and recruiting firm and a couple of other things. But this was his first time jumping into really a customer service brand. And he was like, you know what, I want to learn everything. So he worked the front desk. He was the manager for the first 6 months. And then he put a manager in place, right? Mm-hmm. And then he was building location 2 and so on. And so you can start with a manager from day one, but it's still ultimately going to be your responsibility to set that vision, culture, and goal set with that manager so they know what they're working towards. You know what I mean? So it's an accountability lever that, I need our franchisees to understand. Yeah, it can be manager driven. You can't let that manager be on an island. You know what I mean? And this isn't it's not a Jimmy John's or a QSR where, and no disrespect to them, but that's pretty plug and play when it gets to food and all that, right? You don't want, when you have 10 stylists, you want to make sure at the end of the year, you only lost 3 of those stylists, right? Because if you're constantly losing 7 out of 10 people you have, it's a really long hill to climb.
Yeah, I know there are some concepts where the stylists are not necessarily employees, but they're renting out the chair. Do you guys do that as well, or are the stylists all employees?
Great question. So they're all employees of our brand, and that's a decision we made from the start. Right, is we wanted this to be a team in an atmosphere where you're part of Scissors and Scotch. When you rent a chair or you're a 1099 employee, are you part of the team? Sure, but you're sort of outsourced, right? And you can walk away whenever. I'm not saying you can't walk away when you're a W-2 employee, but that's why we offer health insurance. That's why we have vacation, right? We have paid time off for our people. And that was important to us is when we were coming out and building this and saying, hey, let's take a look at this industry and how we can, affect change at a staff level is through that.
And also with some models, I understand some have a membership model versus just, straight up on transactional. How do you guys work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from a membership model standpoint, we have a membership option, right, for our clients. That doesn't mean we're membership dependent, right? And what I mean by that is our memberships are based on frequency and the level of service you want. So we have memberships that every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, right? So then you pick the level of service you want, we put it on your card, and you're set to go. What I mean by not membership dependent, there is a lot of men out there, a lot of guys out there that come in and they get their haircut every 7-8 weeks, right? Those are still valuable clients to Scissors and Scotch and to our brand and to the stylist. They just don't happen to fit within a membership program that we offer. And so that's where, we have a ton of guys. I would even say most of our shops are anywhere from 40 to 55% members to non-members. So there are certain shops that are still, the majority are not members, that they behave like members.
But the membership model helps because you have the recurring revenue.
Totally. And when we look at that, Frank, it's one of those, it's a lot of internal discussions. It's a chicken and the egg thing in terms of, hey, are members coming back more frequently because they have a membership? You know what I mean? Or are people, so those are some passionate and fun discussions internally with the HQ team and the franchisees. And that's where the revenue side's great. But when I look at memberships and I see that from a business owner perspective, especially early on when you are trying to go from 0 clients at your store on day 1 to 1,000 clients by month 6, month over month. When I have 400 members, I know that our member to service ratio is about 90% of our members come in every month, right? So if you have 500 members, 450 are going to come in the following month. As a owner of a business, now I know, okay, I have 450 appointments that are going to be booked throughout the month. I need to get to 1,000. Okay, now I know math. I need, 200, I'm going to get 250 new clients. Okay, now I need 300 non-members to come in. How do I do that? Right. And so that's sort of the math problem you start working through in your head of, okay, I have this many members. Now I have that many appointments next month. Boom. And so now I can think through that. And sure, the revenue comes from appointments. And, we want our usage rate on memberships is in the 90s. We don't have a lot of breakage, and that's okay for us because we want clients to use their membership. Our attrition rate is 2%. So we're not churning members, and people cancel because they move or they're traveling or whatever, right? They're not canceling because they don't like it.
Sure.
And they're not getting use out of it. So that's a unique thing with our model, is that a lot of times brands can look at membership and be like, oh, I want a ton of breakage. Yeah, sure. We don't, right? We want people to use it.
Right. This is the fun part of the business I like, where, where you're getting together with your team and just strategically kind of going through the different scenarios on how to grow.
Absolutely.
And yeah, the membership model works in some, for some concepts and doesn't work for others. And, outsourcing, having stylists as employees, and it's all part of what you want your culture to be, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, okay.
You hit the nail on the head.
So there's one more big one. And that is, what is your philosophy on selling franchises, just single unit versus multi-unit franchising? What's your take on that?
My preference is to sell multi-unit,
okay.
Right? I would say single unit ownership is definitely doable, right? But it's one of those things where if you're going to be a single unit franchisee, I do all the development still, right? So I qualify every franchisee. I do the introductory call, the lead calls, take them through our sales funnel. One of the first things I try to uncover is, what are your goals, right? Do you want to be a single unit owner? And a lot of times those conversations start with, well, I want to be multi-unit, but I'm going to start with a single, right? And
sure.
that's okay. And that's one of those discussions, especially in this brand, you can do a single unit and you can make good money, right? But man, if you're an entrepreneur and you have growth mindset and if you're the owner operator, you can do that. Own one location, you'll be fine, or you can put it on autopilot at a certain point. Great. But I feel like a lot of the franchisee candidates we're attracting and what I'm trying to uncover, I don't want somebody to be satisfied with one. You know what I mean? I want them to get to a point where they're not bored per se, but they're ready for their next challenge. And that next challenge is going from one location to 2 locations, or 2 locations to 3 locations. And so this model really does work well with multi-unit because of the efficiencies you can get from a staffing level in a marketing perspective, in a service-based business, right? So when you're talking about, our 5 locations in Denver, when we opened the 5th location, the brand awareness we had was like off the charts, right? And so now if you're saying, hey, I opened my first one, and as an emerging franchisor, it's important for me to explain to candidates, hey, when you sign a franchise agreement for us in Las Vegas, you're the first person to go penetrate that market. I need you to understand that's a lot of work. That's a lot of effort. That all the dollars that you're putting in digitally to marketing, that's all you, man, or woman, or whoever.
Right.
You got to go out, activate the community. You got to do that. But hey, you go do that and you build a successful first location. Now you open a second location 4 miles down the road. You know what you're going to have at that second location? You're going to have a built-in membership base. You're going to have brand awareness. And so when you can do that and cultivate an environment of multi-unit franchisees within your system, yeah, it's really good, right? And currently, all of our franchisees, we have a couple that are single unit currently, but they're working to get to multi-unit, right? And when I see that, that's really exciting for me as a founder of the brand and somebody who's trying to see this thing through.
Do you want your multi-unit franchise owners to have locations that are adjacent, or are you okay with, crossing state lines and having them spread out? What's your take on that?
Great question. I would say for your first 2 to 3 locations, we want you to be in the same market.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason for that is just going from 1 to 2. It doesn't sound like a lot. It's a lot of work, right? 2 to 3 is even harder because then you have to decide, okay, what's my organizational structure in terms of, am I going to have a district manager over these 3? What's my role become after that, et cetera? And so you lose the economies you get from multi-unit if you're in different markets. And so until you can build that efficiency and understand it, our Kansas City franchisees are a great example. They opened 4 locations in the Kansas City area. And then they just purchased the St. Louis market, about 18 months ago. And so they opened their first location there about 7 months ago. So now they have 4 in Kansas City, 1 in St. Louis. but they have a regional manager that sits over the 5 locations. And then, they're able to build that. And so they'll continue to build out the KC market, add a second location in St. Louis and a third. And so now you have multi-unit ownership, you're multi-unit and multi-market. And that's sort of the path that I see for franchisees coming in to our system, and how we would like to see them grow with us.
Sure. I just feel like I've seen over the last 10 years, the sophistication level of franchise owners has risen significantly, where the aspirations of franchise owners are looking for multi-unit, and even crossing multi-brand. It's always been out there, but it just seems like we're playing at another level now.
Yeah. And look, I'll say this, the industry a lot better than I do. Right. But over the last 6 years of franchising, I think what I've seen is, to your point about sophistication, you're seeing people that are building out organizations from a franchisee level that now the franchisor used to be, and they still are responsible for an operations team, a marketing team, a support department, et cetera. But now you're seeing these franchisees that have 10 locations of one brand, 5 of another, and they're building their own organization to handle. They're building like an umbrella organization to handle multiple brands, right? Or multiple markets, and that is really cool to see, right? Because that is buy-in that the franchise model works, right? Yes. If you can go out and prove that you have a brand that is sticky, a model that works, and the support system and the systems and the infrastructure to help those franchisees grow, now the sky's the limit for them, because it becomes plug and play. Because frankly, I put our Kansas City guys up here. We have a few other operators in the system that I think could be better operators than we are, right? That we learn from. And when that happens, man, that just makes everybody better. You know what I mean? Sure. And that's, like, I'm big on culture at the shop level, but we're even bigger on franchisee culture, right? Because, one of our Kansas City franchisees just went down to Houston to spend 2 days with him and talk to him and support him. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
And when you can foster that network, that's sort of the holy grail of franchising, is when people are telling their friends about it, they're willing to help. It's really cool. I love seeing that.
Yeah. And that's the power of franchising anyway, is that I know starting out for me, I couldn't afford, the best employees. I just didn't have the kind of capital. But when you're franchising, you're able to attract great people, folks that you could have never afforded to bring to your organization.
It's a really good way to put it. I have conversations with our franchisees, and I'll open my eyes and be like, holy crap, how did we not think about something like that? Or, you know what I mean? It's just, that's the power of franchising, to your point.
Yeah. And they're on the
you have to be open to it, right? And I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, go ahead. You're right.
You have to be willing to accept that feedback. And I'm not saying that, you don't want franchisees to like dictate your decision making, right? Because you still have to have a vision for the brand, what you're accomplishing. And a lot of times franchisees, feedback can be short-sighted because they're like, oh man, at my 4 locations, this would really help. And you're thinking, okay, I'm doing this to scale at 100. Is that scalable currently? Will it be in the future, et cetera? So there's a balance there, but you have to be willing to accept feedback and then make decisions based on what's happening at the shop level with your franchisees.
Yeah. Are you guys at a level yet where you're looking at a franchise advisory council?
Not yet. We have such a tight-knit group of franchisees still where, we have 12 in the system. It's just, we talk to them so much, right? That it's almost like a pseudo one where, everybody's sort of involved on that. But, ultimately we'll have some type of franchisee something here in 2 to 3 years.
That makes sense. Yeah. You guys can still have that close touch right now. But what's the vision? How big is big for you guys? What are you thinking?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we've been looking at. We're never going to be a brand that has 1,000 units, in our opinion. Can we get to 750? Probably. One thing with Sean Tanner and I is that I would rather have, let's just take Houston, for instance, as a random DMA, right? You look at population, you look at our customer analytic data, our solution to select sites and real estate, tell us how many of our potential customers live within that market. Like, holy smokes, man, this could be 30 locations, right? Well, sure, in a perfect world, if you can find real estate in the exact spot in the right area, and you're not cannibalizing territories and whatnot. And so we look at that and say, okay, let's have 15 to 20 locations that do 1.3 to 1.5 million instead of 30 locations that do 750,000, right? And so that's sort of our growth goal is we we want to get to, we want to, we don't want to saturate markets. We want to penetrate them effectively and make sure that we are setting our franchisees and every single shop up for success. And success to us is $1 million plus AUV on that front. And so if we were ever to get to a point where we're cannibalizing a location just to squeeze out 500,000 more revenue, that's not what we're about, and so we're about growth, but we're about strategic growth and doing it the right way.
Cool. How big is a typical territory?
So we usually do about 2 miles or the greater of 25,000 people, and so that's where we lean heavily into our consumer analytics platform. I know people in the franchising industry are familiar with, a solution called Buxton. We use a new solution now called Calibrate, and that helped us build out our customer profiles, right? So I know where I can go to any city in the country and it's going to tell me how many people live within this 2 mile radius or this 15-minute drive time or whatever we're looking at. And it's going to tell me, hey, yeah, okay, wow, I can absolutely put a shop here, or I can't. And so that's what we use to kind of guide our territory management and mapping, is making sure that there are enough potential clients within that radius to support a shop.
Yeah, that is one of the big changes, I'll tell you, in 20 years of franchising, is that 20 years ago, only the big boys had access to that kind of software.
Right.
And now, obviously, you want, as an emerging franchise system, you want to have it immediately, especially you take your company-owned locations, you see what are the demographics on what's working, what's not working, then you can plot the rest of the country or different regions of the country. I could not imagine doing business today without using a territory software.
And Frank, it's an investment, right?
Totally.
It was our first ever, we used Buxton for the last 6.5 years, started using it in 2017. I mean, that was a over $30,000 investment every single year for our brand. And that's a tough check to write when you're an emerging brand, right?
But if you save one franchise,
correct,
it was worth it.
Right. And that was a tool that, as younger founders, we were very focused on technology as we grew this brand. We thought the salon and barbershop industry was behind the 8 ball in terms of online presence, websites, apps, scheduling, et cetera. And so when we looked at that and started franchising, we're saying, okay, well, how are we going to, be tech forward as an emerging brand?
Right.
Well, we're going to understand our customers. We're going to understand our data. We're going to know all that, and we're going to make intelligent decisions about site selection. And so for me and our team, not only did it help in the real estate process after a franchisee signed, it helped show franchisee candidates that we weren't just a small brand. Yeah, we still were, but they could see that, hey, we made the investments and we are committed to the success of this business. And so that's where it was a great real estate source, but it's also a sales tool. And that's something I always say, is that I'm proud that, we made that investment, because it really did help us.
Super smart, man. Well done. Well done. What's been your biggest surprise since franchising? Let's see, 7 years ago now.
It's a great question. I would say you're kind of stumping me here. The biggest surprise is going to be the inconsistency of contractors throughout the United States, and the build out process. That we've run into some pretty bad GCs, even in our short time period, and that's not from a lack of that industry.
It could trip you up.
It can trip you up, right? And that's one area that we do have a dedicated director of construction on staff, and he's a project manager. He guides everybody from test fit to opening. But man, you can't predict construction issues or delays or a bad GC.
Yeah.
And so that's been the most frustrating thing to me. And I'm not, it's going to sound like a cop out, because it kind of is, but it's not really in your control. You know what I mean? And that's where you can try to grab that process as much as you can, and you can have the systems in place and all that. But man, when something bad happens, or a contractor doesn't pay a subcontractor, and now you have a lien on your business, and there's just all these things going through. And so I would say making sure we have that buttoned up has been the biggest surprise there for me.
Yeah. No, I understand. In this post-COVID world, what's the average time it takes to build out a Scissors and Scotch?
Yeah. So we're 9 to 12 months from signing to opening. Okay. Now that's the whole process, right? So you sign your franchise agreement February 1st. you might get open this year, right? And that's where site selection. So there's construction. We actually, like, as much as I just talked about how that's been my biggest surprise, it takes about 10 to 12 weeks to build out a Scissors Scotch. It's not overly cumbersome. We have a great design manual. We have great plans, etc. But what the other piece that's out of our control is the site selection process and how, we have a national real estate team we use. They're fantastic. But you would think landlords want to lease space and they will get back to you on your LOI
right
in a timely manner.
Especially in this market.
You know what? They don't. Right. And some of them are great. Some of them are awesome. They're on top of their stuff. But it could take 90 days to get a lease done or more. And so then when you're at that point, you're 3 months in, you sign your lease, then you're in permitting. And that has been the biggest issue post-COVID. And, throughout COVID was the permitting times just exploded, especially in certain localities from, people leaving the office. They don't have as many employees. That has been a major pain point. And so when you can't control how long it takes to get a plumbing permit or a building permit or whatever, this is what you do, right? And so, so call it 3 months to sign a lease, 3 months of drawings and permitting. Now you're at 6 months. Now you're at another 3 months for construction. Factor in a couple of delays in there. Now, you know what I mean? So it adds up over time. And so, it's 9 to 12 months, and we're hoping to try to push that down, but it sort of is what it is in the brick and mortar industry on this front.
Yeah. It's about setting expectations, right, to the new franchise owner so that, they're not disappointed or,
Well, yeah, everybody comes in, they're like, I can't wait. And they think they're going to open in 6 months. It's like, man, I wish I could get you open in 6 months. Trust me.
Overall about the brand, what advice do you give people who are considering joining Scissors and Scotch?
I would say overall about the brand is that, the three founders are still involved day to day and will be for a very long time, foreseeable future, right? We're not looking to get to 50 locations or 100 locations and sell this thing. We're really trying to build this the right way and see it through. And you have a team that cares deeply. We have 12 employees and 32 locations. We've made a lot of investments in our team. We have a VP of operations and support. We have a VP of marketing. We have a VP of technology. We have a director of support. We have a director of culture. I mean, we make those investments in our team because we know when we are set up to scale, we can't not have those resources, right? And so Sean Tanner and I are always going to invest in our team, in our infrastructure, to make sure that our franchisees feel supported. You can ask anybody, any franchisee in the system, they're going to say, are you supported? Absolutely, right? I'm not saying we're perfect on everything we do for our franchisees. And there's ways we can improve. One thing we're working on right now is lowering that investment barrier. We are, 600 to 700,000 to get a location open. We're working on a smaller footprint currently, 1,200 to 1,600 square feet, and trying to optimize that build out and all in cost to about 500. And if we can do that and have the same revenue upside, then I think you're going to see hyper growth with ourselves in this brand through our current franchisee network and future franchisees that come in and join us.
Yeah. What's the current typical size of a location?
1,800 to 2,200 is what we're currently at. And so, we started, our first location was 2,800. Our second was, 2,700. Our third was 3,300.
Pretty massive.
So we were just, they were massive, but, those shops collectively two of our first four shops did 4.4 million last year in two shops in a barber shop. But again, they're bigger shops, right? And so it's like, if we can optimize this to a way of, hey, now you're 500,000 and you're going to make 1.1, that's great. You know what I mean? And so, that's what we're working to get toward.
Awesome. Erik, I've enjoyed this. This has been great. If someone's interested in learning more about the franchise opportunity, where can they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So go to franchise.scissorscotch.com. You can check out the offerings there. You can check out our consumer site, obviously, scissorscotch.com as well. Or hell, you can email me personally. I'll handle you. Email me, Erik, ERIK, at scissorsscotch.com, and we can have a conversation. It's something I'm passionate about and love doing. I could do this for another 2 hours just talking shop. So
that's awesome.
Really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, no, this is great. I love hearing a founder involved in Fran Dev early on. That's near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, man. I mean, you probably did the same thing.
I did.
You have to be if you're the founder, you have co-founders. I'm a firm believer in that too. You have to understand the process, and nobody's going to be as passionate about it as you are. And that's early on. Still, people are going to buy into this brand because of us at 100 units. But man, when you're at 5 units, you know what they're really buying into? They're buying into you. They're buying into the people. Sure, the brand's great, but they're putting their trust in you. And that doesn't go lost on us. We're asking somebody if they sign on for 3 locations, that's a $2 million investment probably over time. You know what I mean? And that doesn't get lost on us. It's a humbling experience for sure.
Erik, that is phenomenal advice. I would say that's the tip jar, but do you have anything else? I always finish every podcast with the tip jar. If I was an entrepreneur looking to franchise my concept, is there a piece of advice you'd give me before I dive into franchising?
I would immerse yourself in everything franchising, from the conferences to the books that you can find out there, this podcast, right? Research single thing you can, and don't only be focused on your industry. Just because you franchise a barbershop or a sports concept or a restaurant or whatever, look to outside perspectives, right? And that's something that we did, is we didn't feel there was a contemporary in our area that we could measure ourselves against, right? So we really went out and said, who are we measuring ourselves against? Find somebody to go do that and set goals and honestly be very, very well capitalized, right? It's an expensive journey, but it's well worth it, right? But you have to be able to wait through those tough times, right, and get through it. So that'd be my last piece of advice there.
I love it. That's great. I wish you, Erik, and Tanner and Sean all the continued success with Scissors and Scotch. So you guys keep doing the thing, man. You guys are doing great. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, Frank. We appreciate your time, man, and excited to chat again in the future.
Yes. All right. Thanks for being on the show. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fiume, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.